Hey folks, we're at DCRainmaker.com here, today with the new Elite Suito Trainer. Now this trainer comes in at $799 and the rest of the currency is down below right there. But what's most notable about it, most important thing about it really is the fact that it comes with the cassette, which is the first time we've seen any trainer below like $1,200 come with a cassette. And by first I mean the only other trainer, because the only other trainer that comes with a cassette is the Wahoo Kickr at $1,200. Now I've already gotten 2 rides in, or like a ride and a half or so, but first we're going to talk some of the specs, because there's lots of specs. You got to talk specs. Number one is it replicates up to 15% incline, and up to 1900 watts at 40 kilometers an hour and 2900 watts at 60 kilometers an hour. Realistically, you're probably not going to hit either of those two numbers, so that doesn't matter too much. Next, it's got a claimed accuracy of plus or minus 2.5%, which is the same as Elite had for the original Duretto trainer, and then they improved the claimed accuracy spec there, and I suspect this is actually more accurate than that as well. It's just that right now they're claiming that so that maybe you buy something more expensive. But so far this is looking pretty decent, but we'll talk about accuracy in a minute after the first ride. Next, from a build standpoint, you've got metal on both sides. You'll notice it's super slim, which that means that you can go ahead and actually clamp down both of the legs, no problem, and then slide it under a bed or near a shelf or whatever the case may be. I measured about 8 inches stack height, about 20 centimeters, including the skewer. So if you were to leave that on there, clamps the legs, put it on its back or its side, whatever that position is, and slide it under something, that's roughly what it'll be, which is pretty darn skinny. Everything is metal, which is a bit of a change from the Duretto of the past, which had that kind of plastic case around the side. This is just nice and sturdy. And then atop, you've got this handle up there for picking it up and dragging it around. On the compatibility side of things, you've got a quick release skewer right there that comes with it, as well as adapters in the box for through axle support. If you need boost through axle support, you can also get that as well with an additional accessory adapter. It is notable though that they did include the 142x12 adapter in the box, because a lot of other trainers at this price point aren't actually including that in the box. Speaking of things in the box is that cassette like I talked about earlier. Now it is the Shimano 105 11-speed cassette, which is pretty much perfectly fine for indoor training use. Now it is compatible with any other 11-speed system, so if you got SRAM like myself on the bike, there's no issues with that. In fact, you can see that I rode that in exactly that configuration with SRAM ETAP Red atop this Shimano 105 cassette. But if you have a 9 or 10-speed bike and you want to pop that cassette on instead, you can certainly do that no problem from SRAM or Shimano. If, however, you do have a campy 9, 10, or 11-speed cassette, you can get a different free hub adapter for this. I think it's like $50 or so. That'll swap that out and make that compatible. And most interesting is that this is actually XD and XDR compatible from a trainer standpoint. The adapter, I believe, costs about $45, but is available today, which is something that Wahoo doesn't have yet. So if you are rocking a new bike with XDR, for example, this actually will work for you. Oh, now is a good time to mention, if you're finding this video useful or interesting, just whack that like button bottom right there right now. That'll go ahead and help the channel out quite a bit. Coming back to the box real quick, what's interesting about this box is that this thing comes totally assembled. The only thing you have to do is slide the quick release skewer in there and plug in the power cable. That's it. It literally pulls out, the cassette is already on it as we discussed earlier, the legs open up, and you're done. There's no adding the legs like there is on most of Elite's other trainers or even the Wahoo Kickr Core. And not that those are tough things to do, but there is something to be said for just simply pulling it out of the box and plugging it in. That's like where consumer technology should be these days. Also notable is that in the box there's a free 1-month Zwift trial. Now that may not sound like a big deal, and for most of you that already have Zwift, it probably isn't a big deal. But up until this point, you've only really seen like 7 and occasionally a 14-day type free trial. So a 1-month free trial of Zwift isn't too shabby, especially if you're shopping around different trainer apps. Now one minor tidbit I did notice on my very first ride is that it sounded pretty rough, and I couldn't figure out why at first until I realized that this cassette had no oil or lube on it. In my drivetrain, my chain on my existing bike wasn't super well maintained, so I just added a little bit of oil to this and it was good to go. Based on that feedback, Elite's going to go ahead and put a little bit of oil in the box as well, so that this will sound really nice and pretty right out of the box. The oil, by the way, is just that, whatever that is back there. It's been like sitting in my bench for like 5-7 years, a long time, so it doesn't cost more than a couple bucks and it lasts forever. Skipping over to the protocol side of things, this supports ANT+ and Bluetooth Smart, and it supports it across all of the proper protocols. So the ANT+ side, it supports ANT+ FEC, which is the trainer control. It supports broadcasting as a power meter over ANT+, it supports broadcasting as a speed and cadence sensor over ANT+, and does the exact same thing on the Bluetooth Smart side, cadence. It's like the poster child for adopting all the standards properly. In fact, that's exactly what I did when I used it with Zwift. I went ahead and used Bluetooth Smart FTMS first on Zwift on Apple TV, and then again on my second ride on Zwift on iOS, and it worked great. And what's kind of important about this is that it includes the cadence in the transmission. So unlike Wahoo, which does not include cadence in the transmission, this works really well with Apple TV. And the reason for that is Apple TV has a limitation of 2 Bluetooth smart sensor connections plus the Apple TV remote control. So in the case of this trainer, I can use one connection for the entire trainer and get control, power, speed, cadence, all that jazz across one of those connections, and then save the secondary connection for my heart rate strap. Whereas with the Wahoo trainer, you don't have any secondary connection for heart rate straps. You have to then route it through something like the Zwift companion app, which is usually finicky. So this just works a heck of a lot better. With all that paired up, I was off riding around New York City on Zwift. And, from a ride feel standpoint, it felt good, not like fantastic. It's appropriate to the price point. By that, I mean that there's nothing at an equal or lower price point that feels any better. And in the same price ballpark, I'd say it feels better than a Tacx Flux 2 does, and certainly more accurate. And then it feels, I'd say, lesser than a Wahoo Kickr Core from a road feel standpoint. Not like substantially, but enough that you notice that. And that's mostly due to the flywheel. In the case of the Suito here, it's got about 3.6 kilo flywheel, whereas the Wahoo Kickr Core is about double that. Also, before I forget, it does include a 1.5 power meter cable right now, but Elite says they're going to switch that up for a 2.5 meter power cable starting in August, but there will be some units in that first batch that go out with a 1.5 meter cable, which is a bit short in my opinion, and they kind of agreed. They did say that if you end up with a 1.5 meter cable as opposed to the longer cable, just to give them a ring and they'll go ahead and get you all hooked up with the longer cable for free. Now, as you'll hear in just a second, this trainer is not silent. That is one other difference between this and the Wahoo Kickr Core, is the Wahoo Kickr Core is virtually silent, save for your drivetrain noise. This does have a little bit of a hum, if you will, to it. It's quieter than the Elite Diretto series, though, so that is something. I'm going to go ahead and listen to that in just a second here. Now, right now you're listening to my lav mic, so things sound really nice and pretty. What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the on-camera mic, and you can hear me pedaling at about 20 miles per hour. Keep in mind that the sound of a trainer is driven entirely by speed, not by power. That's just the way it works in erg mode and stuff. So 20 miles per hour is kind of a good middle ground, safe speed, I think, for most people. And you go ahead and listen to that now. I'm going to switch over to the camera mic so you can hear the echo of the room and all that kind of stuff, as well as the trainer itself. Okay, here is the sound of the voice in the room with the on-camera microphone, and now you can hear the sound of the trainer itself below it. Okay, so there you go, just a bit of an audio sample there. Again, recording audio of trainers is like this mythical beast of ways you can do it wrong, and I can hide things or make things better or worse just by how I tweak the sound and the recording distance and all this kind of stuff. So don't put too much kind of weight into that. I would just say, again, it's not as quiet as a Kickr Core, but definitely quieter than something else, and certainly quieter than any fan that you're going to have on your bike. Okay, so last but not least, let's talk about accuracy of this. Now, the first thing to note is that Elite did say they are going to make some changes to the firmware before they start shipping this out to address some of the accuracy concerns that I saw, primarily around sprints. And so in this case, what I saw here is that overall it was pretty good, very, very close to Vivero Asioma pedals, as well as the 4i Precision Pro power meter that had on my bike at the same time. But there was cases where in sprints it would undercut just slightly on the power. It varied a little bit from sprint to sprint, but 10%, sometimes more, sometimes less, and primarily on slow build sprints. So not really like full on sprints, but like really kind of strong builds, it would lag a bit more. Versus a really straight hard sprint, it actually tracked really quite well. In any case, Elite thinks they can go ahead and address that via firmware. Whether or not they do it like next week, the week after, or a couple months remains to be seen. Keep in mind last year with the Wahoo Kickr Core, that was almost 3 to 4 months before they addressed their sprint power overages. In the case of Cyclops with the Hammer series, we're like on 3 years and it's still not fixed yet. In the case of the Tacx Neo, Neo 2 in particular, there was a few months there where it also had some sprint issues. So this isn't really a new problem in the industry, and hopefully they can just kind of fix it pretty quickly. Meanwhile, on the cadence accuracy side of things, stuff was pretty good there. A couple minor blips, but it's in the ballpark of what I generally see for trainer-driven cadence accuracy as opposed to an actual sensor on your crank arm or whatnot measuring that. I think for most people, unless you're doing very specific cadence drills, it's going to be good enough for what you want for kind of a general ballpark figure. Okay, so there you go, just kind of a complete first look at the Suito trainer. I think this is pretty much going to be the trainer to beat for 2019 in terms of value for the money. One of the things I talk about in my full post, which is linked down below there, is that when it comes to indoor training right now in 2019 and even the last couple of years, there's pretty much two paths companies can take. One is to innovate more on the features, like for example, the Wahoo Kicker climb that went up and down. And whether or not you like that or think that's good or bad, doesn't really matter. The reality is they are innovating there. In the case of Elite, in the past couple of years, they've innovated more on the value and the price. So they're producing a product that is a solid product, nothing wrong with it whatsoever, but they're just doing it for less than everyone else. They did that with the Duretto a couple years ago, and it was enormously popular there. I think that'll probably be the same case with the Suito as well. Now, from an availability standpoint, they're going to start production here in about 2 weeks, and they're going to take the first 2 weeks of that production run and put them in a big container and ship them off to North America, because then there's about a 4 to 6 week delay until that actually arrives in North America. Once those first 2 weeks are done, they're then going to start European production, which means that those units then go straight into retail shops and distributors in Europe. So if you're in Europe, you can expect to see this on store shelves starting in mid-August. And if you're in the US, they're saying the very first week of September, barring any issues. Elite's been pretty darn good about nailing the dates for their hardware the last couple of years, so I don't really expect any delays there. And this unit is pretty much solid from a physical hardware standpoint. It's just the firmware tweaks they want to do for that accuracy bits there. Now, of course, do remember that same first week or so of September is when you typically get new trainers announced at Eurobike, which is when Eurobike is this year. Whether or not we'll see something that competes with this, I don't know, but that's usually the time frame that we see that. Historically speaking, sometimes companies have gone a little bit earlier than that from an announcement standpoint, though I don't necessarily anticipate this year that occurring. I think it'll be pretty much Eurobike or bust. There is no Interbike this year, so it's going to be Eurobike or bust for new trainer announcements. Anyways, if you found this interesting, go ahead and like that like button at the bottom there or the subscribe button. I suspect I have more sports technology goodness on the way. Have a good one.